Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kyle Abbott's world spun out of control in a way he never imagined possible as he found himself in the middle of a dangerous, twisting storm of secrets, betrayals, and haunting revelations, his heartbeat pounding like a war drum in his chest while his eyes, wide and wild, locked onto a scene he was never meant to witness, hidden in the shadows, trembling with both fear and dread. Kyle panicked while peeping through the cracked open doorway of the dimly lit lakeside cabin, the kind of secluded place that carried the stench of conspiracies and clandestine rendezvous, where the silence itself seemed to vibrate with foreboding energy, and his breath caught as Claire Newman, the enigmatic young woman who had wormed her way into his family's fragile empire with her charming smile and calculated mystery, suddenly reached up with a trembling hand to the edge of her face, her slender fingers grazing the contours of a mask she had been wearing for far too long, not just a literal mask of disguise, but a symbolic mask that had shielded her true identity and her true motives from everyone, especially Holden Novak, the man who now sat across from her, unsuspecting of the tidal wave about to crash down upon him, because in this moment, in this room drenched in secrets and silent tears, Claire began to peel away the covering that had made her untouchable, her movements slow, deliberate, almost reverent, as if she were preparing for a ritual unveiling that could shake Genoa City to its very core, and Kyle's hands gripped the wooden frame of the door so tightly his knuckles turned bone white, his pulse roaring in his ears, his stomach knotted with the kind of dread that claws at the soul, because he knew, that once that mask came off, there would be no going back, no turning away, no pretending that what he saw wasn't the kind of revelation that could destroy lives, marriages, and legacies in one swift blow, and he silently begged himself to look away but his eyes refused, frozen on the magnetic, horrifying beauty of the moment as Claire's mask slipped from her face and fell soundlessly onto the hardwood floor with a muted thud that echoed louder than a gunshot in Kyle's ears, and Holden's breath visibly hitched, his jaw slackening, his body leaning forward in a mix of shock and reluctant recognition, because what he saw wasn't merely a face, it was a confession, a truth long buried, a ghost resurrected, and then Claire, her voice trembling yet powerful, her tone lined with both venom and vulnerability, said the first of three devastating things, words that sliced through the air like a blade through silk. "Holden, you never knew the truth about me," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unspoken torment, and Kyle nearly stumbled back as those words dug into his heart like icy shards because he suddenly realized that Holden wasn't the only one in the dark, he himself, all of Genoa City, perhaps even the entire Newman dynasty, had been fed a carefully crafted lie, a half-story dripping with deceit, and the weight of Claire's voice wrapped the room in unbearable tension, while Holden, visibly trembling now, shook his head, his hands clawing at the armrests of his chair as if bracing himself for the collapse of everything he thought he knew, and Claire, not giving him time to recover, not giving Kyle time to breathe, delivered her second statement with the merciless precision of a dagger twisting in an open wound. "You were part of it without even knowing, Holden, every step you took, every choice you made, it was all part of the game they designed for us," and Kyle felt his throat tighten to the point of suffocation, because what Claire was suggesting sounded like a conspiracy bigger than any personal betrayal, something engineered, orchestrated, perhaps by forces too powerful and cruel for anyone in that room to fully comprehend, and Holden recoiled as though struck, his voice breaking as he croaked out a hoarse, "What are you saying?" But Claire only leaned closer, her tone both haunting and seductive, like a siren pulling him deeper into the storm, and then, with a pause so thick that Kyle thought the world itself had frozen still, she delivered the third and most damning revelation of all, the one that made Kyle nearly collapse from sheer shock, the one that would reverberate through Genoa City's power-hungry families for generations. "You were never my enemy, Holden, you were my target, my purpose, and my punishment," she declared, her eyes burning with a mixture of rage, sorrow, and unrelenting determination, and Holden's entire being seemed to collapse in on itself, his eyes glassy with disbelief, his lips parting but no sound escaping, while Kyle's panic turned into something primal, a desperate need to run, to scream, to warn someone, anyone, that what he had just witnessed was not simply a private confession but the prelude to a war that would consume the Abbotts, the Newmans, and Perhaps even the entire fragile balance of Genoa City, and his breath came in ragged gasps as he backed away from the doorway, his legs nearly buckling beneath him, his mind spinning with questions that had no safe answers. Who was Claire, truly, beneath that mask she had finally shed? What twisted web had ensnared Holden without his knowledge? And most of all, what kind of punishment could be so devastating that it would justify years of lies, betrayal, and manipulation? And as Kyle stumbled into the shadows, unseen, unheard, he knew in the pit of his soul that this night, this horrifying unveiling, was only the beginning of something so much darker, so much deadlier, than anyone in Genoa City was prepared to face. And the echo of Claire's 3 sentences lingered in his ears like a curse, binding him to a secret that could destroy everyone he loved if it ever saw the light of day. Kyle's knees threatened to give out as he stumbled backward into the cold hallway outside the cabin, his pulse erratic, his breath shallow, his entire body trembling with the kind of panic that only comes when you've witnessed something that should never have been seen, and yet the pull of curiosity, the same force that had made him risk everything to follow Claire in the first place, anchored his feet to the floor even as his mind screamed at him to run, because what he had just heard wasn't merely shocking, it was paradigm-shattering, the type of revelation that didn't just ruin lives but rewrote destinies. And as Claire's voice echoed through his memory, her 3 chilling confessions branded into the deepest layers of his psyche, he tried to piece together the puzzle of what they truly meant, the weight of each word dragging him deeper into dread. You never knew the truth about me, which meant Holden had been fed a lie. But if Holden had been deceived, then so had Kyle, so had everyone, and suddenly the entire fabric of Claire's existence in Genoa City felt like smoke and mirrors. Then you were part of it without even knowing, a statement dripping with conspiracy, suggesting Holden had been a pawn, a player in some larger, twisted design. And if Holden was unknowingly part of it, who else was? Could Kyle's own family be tied into this dangerous web? Could the Abbotts or the Newmans have unknowingly fueled a game they couldn't control? And then the third and most haunting declaration, you were my target, my purpose, and my punishment, which sent a freezing bolt through Kyle's chest because it meant Holden wasn't just collateral damage, he was central to whatever twisted vendetta Claire had nurtured in silence, and Kyle couldn't stop the sickening realization from clawing its way up his throat. If Holden was her target, then what did that make everyone else? Were they simply obstacles? Or was there a bigger purpose still hidden beneath layers of deception? His head spun as he pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he crouched low, trying to quiet his ragged breaths so they wouldn't give him away, but no amount of silence could drown out the storm raging inside him, and in the next room he could still hear the tremor in Holden's voice as he struggled to process what Claire had just unveiled, his words muffled yet frantic. Claire, that doesn't make sense. Why me? Why now? And Kyle's chest clenched with the urge to burst through the door, to demand answers himself, but terror rooted him in place, forcing him to remain a silent spectator in a play that felt scripted by fate itself. And Claire's reply, low and deliberate, pierced through the crack in the door. Because, Holden, you were the key, they built everything around you, and you never even saw it, she said, her tone a mix of sorrow and accusation. And Kyle's mind raced with questions about who they were. Powerful enemies lurking in the shadows, family rivals, or perhaps ghosts from the past with unfinished business. And the deeper Kyle thought, the more he realized this wasn't simply about Holden or Claire, this was about legacies, about the toxic intertwining of the Newman and Abbott dynasties, about old scars festering into new wars. And a sick dread pooled in his stomach as he imagined Victor Newman's steely eyes narrowing once he discovered what was transpiring here, because if Victor learned that Holden had unknowingly been at the center of Claire's scheme, the wrath unleashed would be catastrophic. And Kyle knew Jack Abbott too, his father, the man who had fought Victor for decades, would see this as yet another battle in a war that never truly ended. And Kyle shuddered as the weight of the future pressed down on him, because what had begun as a quiet moment of eavesdropping was now transforming into a ticking time bomb that could ignite the Newman-Abbott rivalry into an inferno unlike anything Genoa City had ever endured. Meanwhile Holden's voice grew louder, more desperate, his words cracking under the pressure. If I was your target, then what does that make everyone else? What does that make you? He demanded, and Kyle held his breath as silence fell, a silence so thick it felt alive, until Claire finally answered, her voice trembling, but her resolve unbreakable. It makes me the one who has to finish what they started, whether you forgive me or not, she confessed, and Kyle's skin prickled as the truth settled into his bones. Claire wasn't just removing a mask, she was stepping into her role as something far more dangerous, someone who had carried the burden of a vendetta for years, someone who had chosen Holden not out of love or chance but out of obligation to some darker promise. And Kyle suddenly realized that if he remained silent, if he failed to expose this, he would be complicit, but his fear of being caught, of being dragged into the storm too soon, paralyzed him, and he could only crouch lower as Holden surged to his feet inside the room, his chair scraping violently against the floor, his voice breaking with raw pain. "Claire, don't do this, don't turn into them, don't become what you hate," he pleaded, and Kyle could hear the trembling in Claire's breath, the war raging inside her between her heart and her duty, between the mask she had worn and the truth she had just revealed, and for a brief second Kyle thought she might crack, that her eyes might soften, that she might choose love over vengeance, but instead her reply came sharp and steady, a blade disguised as words. "It's too late, Holden, it was always too late," and those words detonated inside Kyle's chest like a bomb, because they carried the finality of destiny, the cruel hand of inevitability that no amount of begging could change. And Kyle finally realized that this wasn't just about Holden or Claire, it was about everyone connected to them, about every family secret, every hidden alliance, every manipulative scheme that had been woven through Genoa City's history like a curse. And as Kyle braced himself against the wall, his chest heaving, his vision swimming with fear, he knew that when the truth finally spilled into the open, it wouldn't just shatter Holden and Claire, it would drag every Newman, every Abbott, every soul in their orbit into a reckoning from which none of them would emerge unscathed, and his panic reached a fever pitch as he staggered back into the shadows, clutching his pounding chest, whispering to himself, "God, what have I done by watching this?" Because he knew, deep down, that seeing the unmasking had chained him to this nightmare forever, and no amount of running would ever set him free. Holden's face was a portrait of devastation as he stumbled backward, his breath ragged, his eyes wild, every muscle in his body betraying the weight of what Claire had just confessed, and Kyle, crouched in the dark hallway, felt the sheer force of Holden's collapse as if it were his own, his chest tightening with empathy and dread because this wasn't simply the unraveling of one man, it was the unraveling of a narrative, a history, an entire foundation Holden thought was built on truth but was now crumbling beneath his feet. And as Holden staggered toward the window, running a trembling hand through his hair, he choked out, "Claire, you can't mean this, you can't just tell me I was a target, that my whole life has been some cruel punishment," his voice raw with disbelief, and Claire's eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, bore into him with equal parts sorrow and conviction, her words low but unrelenting, "Holden, I wish it weren't true, I wish I could erase the lies, but this was written long before you and I ever crossed paths. And I was given a role I couldn't escape," she said, her voice breaking on the last word, and Kyle, whose heart pounded louder with every syllable, realized that Claire wasn't merely confessing for Holden's sake, she was unburdening herself of years of torment, and yet the unmasking also shackled Holden with unbearable truths that could never be unheard, and his anguish spilled into the room as he clenched his fists, pacing like a caged animal, muttering, all this time I thought I was choosing my own path. But you're telling me I've been nothing more than a piece on someone's board? Tell me who, Claire, tell me who did this to us," he demanded, his voice thunderous, and Kyle, straining to remain silent, pressed his hand over his mouth to keep from gasping, because he too burned for the answer, he too wanted to know the faceless villains who had orchestrated this nightmare, but Claire remained motionless for a long moment, the silence between them suffocating, until she whispered, "You already know, Holden. You just don't want to see it," and those words sliced through the air like glass, leaving Holden frozen, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts, his mind clawing at shadows of memory, trying to piece together connections he had buried long ago, and Kyle's own thoughts raced to Victor Newman, to the ghosts of schemes that had haunted Genoa City for decades, to the tangled rivalry between the Newmans and the Abbotts that had scorched generations. Could Claire be hinting that Holden's suffering wasn't random, but a byproduct of the never-ending war between dynasties? Could Holden be a pawn in Victor's ruthless games, or worse, could Jack himself have played a role unknowingly? The idea rattled Kyle's core, forcing bile up his throat as he clung to the wall for balance, and in the room Holden's fury boiled over, his voice trembling but fierce, "No. Claire, you don't get to say that, You don't get to leave me with riddles. I need names, I need the truth, he shouted, slamming his fist against the wooden window frame so hard the glass rattled, and Claire flinched but didn't retreat, her body stiff, her eyes burning with determination as she stepped closer to him, her words falling like heavy stones. The truth would destroy you, Holden, and maybe that's what they wanted all along. But I won't let them break you, not completely, because as much as I was sent to punish you, her voice faltered, her throat tightening, but she pushed forward. I cared, Holden, I cared more than I was supposed to, and that's the one thing they couldn't control. And Kyle's pulse skipped as he processed the raw confession buried beneath her declaration, the startling admission that amidst all the lies and schemes, Claire had allowed herself to feel something real, something forbidden, for the very man she was meant to ruin. And Holden's eyes widened, his anger fracturing under the weight of her vulnerability, his lips parting but no sound escaping as he processed that revelation, his entire body trembling with the collision of betrayal and longing. And Kyle nearly groaned aloud because he saw it in Holden's face, the undeniable flicker of love, the kind of love that defies reason, the kind of love that could become a weapon in its own right. And that realization made Kyle's panic spiral, because if Holden still loved her despite her confessions, then Claire's grip over him could tighten, leading him willingly into whatever darkness she had been sent to unleash, and Genoa City would have no defense against the storm she represented. And as Holden's hands finally fell limp at his sides, his voice broke in a whisper, then why, Claire? Why go through with it if you felt something real? Why not stop before it went this far? And Claire's shoulders shook as she bit back tears, her reply heavy with anguish, because love doesn't erase the chains we inherit, Holden, it just makes them heavier, she murmured, and those words struck Kyle like a thunderbolt, because they weren't just about her, they were about everyone in Genoa City. About how every generation inherited the rivalries, the vendettas, the betrayals of the ones who came before, carrying legacies they never asked for. Legacies that chained them to fates they couldn't escape, and Kyle, clutching his head, realized with horror that Claire was right, because hadn't he himself been born into the Abbott Newman War? Hadn't he been marked by family rivalries, forced to choose sides, to play roles he never wanted? He saw it now with agonizing clarity, that all of them were wearing masks, all of them were pawns, all of them were trapped in a story written long before their births, and as that truth sank in, Kyle's panic twisted into something darker, despair, the creeping sense that no matter how hard he tried to break free, he too was bound to repeat the cycle, and his chest heaved as he whispered to himself, God, we're all doomed, his voice trembling in the silence of the hallway, unheard by the two souls locked in their devastating dance inside the cabin, where Holden finally collapsed into the chair he had abandoned moments earlier, burying his face in his hands, whispering brokenly, I don't know who I am anymore, Claire, I don't know what's real. And Claire, standing over him, her mask discarded on the floor like a fallen crown, reached out as though to comfort him but stopped short, her hand hovering inches from his trembling shoulder, her entire body torn between the mission that had defined her and the love she had stumbled into, and Kyle's heart hammered violently because he knew this moment, this hesitation, could decide everything, whether Claire doubled down on her purpose or allowed herself to break free, whether Holden succumbed to despair or rose to fight back, and whether Kyle himself would find the courage to stop hiding and finally intervene, because the longer he stayed silent, the deeper the poison would seep into their lives, and yet terror still gripped him, pinning him in place as the weight of destiny pressed down on them all, and somewhere in the back of his mind he knew, with grim certainty, that whatever choice was made in that cabin tonight would ripple outward, shattering families, igniting wars, and leaving Genoa City forever changed. Kyle's palms were slick with sweat as he crouched lower in the hallway, his phone burning like a live wire in his pocket, the temptation to pull it out and text Summer or Jack clawing at him with every passing second, because he knew, he absolutely knew, that what he was witnessing was too big, too dangerous, too devastating to keep locked inside his own panicked mind, yet his fear of being discovered by Claire kept his hands frozen, his body trapped between the duty to warn his family and the dread of being caught in her merciless gaze, and inside the room Holden sat broken, his head buried in his hands, his voice a hoarse whisper of defeat as he repeated over and over, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know what's real.